Hey guys, welcome to this tutorial video on parts of speech. And what are parts of speech? Parts of speech are just different components, grammatical components of what makes language and expression. So, as you recall, there are so many different words, multiple words, thousands of words in all different types of languages. And speaking them all in turn, like for example, saying chair, desk, phone, wall, um, really makes no sense until there is some kind of function given to them. Typically, we were looking at back in January the noun, which is one component, and the verb as the second component. Without these two parts of speech, everything else kind of falls apart. Um, Today we're going to be dealing with the first one, parts of speech, which is the noun. Okay, and I think many of you guys already recall that a noun simply means person, place, or thing. And if you recall me mentioning that there's also a fourth component of the noun. Let me just turn these notifications off here. Um, so there's a fourth one, right? That is or abstract. Okay, so the fourth is an abstract thought. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, for example, a person could be any person's name. Um, it could also be a pronoun. Also, a place could be any place: school, work, Canada, you name it. A thing is pretty much a table, a chair, a wall, a house. But an abstract is a noun that's expressed outside of the realm of reality. So, for example, I cannot call a unicorn a thing because really it doesn't exist. Oh, well, sorry if I ruined this for you, but if you're having dreams or if you're having things that you're expressing, abstract nouns are those nouns. Now, essentially, should we care about these types of things? Well, I mean, at the end of the day, context will provide you with um, meaning. So a unicorn could be understood as a thing, could be understood as a person. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about comprehension, so reading a story, reading an essay, and coming across a word that in reality does not exist, can change the context of the entire story or the entire essay. So keep that in mind. Person, place, thing, and abstract. Um, so a noun is pretty much on its own, just a word, as I've mentioned, but give it a function and it transforms into different things. So the first function of the noun is the subject. Okay, and the subject is always found beginning of words, and it is the only thing that matters because it's the only thing around which the sentence is created. So it's the point of the sentence. Okay, so let's say as an example that you got a present for Christmas. The present is the subject. It is the whole point where you're going to say to your friends, "Hey, I got this present for Christmas." That is the essence of pretty much the entire case of the subject. So remember that nouns have cases. So I'm going to put cases here. Okay, and cases are functions. So remember, a subject is always at the beginning of the sentence. It is the point of the sentence around which everything revolves. Okay, the next component of a noun is the direct object. You will also see it referred to in other languages and sometimes in English as an accusative. Okay, so an accusative is an accusatory noun. Big word, accusatory. Pretty much, if you are getting the idea of to accuse someone of something, that's where it comes. That's what it literally means. It's a noun that is being pointed out, that is being accused, and it typically receives the action of the verb. Okay, so direct object is something that my verb or the subject is interested in. So I'll give you guys some examples in a second, but an accusative is pretty much receiving the action, and I want to point out directly, okay? Typically comes right after the predicate, okay? Not always, but most of the time. Predicate, and by predicate we mean verb, okay? That won't change for us. All right, number 3 is the indirect object, also lovingly called the dative, okay? So the dative case is a very peculiar case coming from the Latin word to give, do, dare, dedi, datum. And it is a giving noun. Its whole case revolves, or its whole function revolves around receiving something. But not directly, okay? It's receiving, so it receives the action indirectly as opposed to directly. And it has the preposition to or for. Okay, so whenever we see to or for preceding this noun, right off the bat, you should see it as an indirect object. So an example of an indirect object would be I am giving a gift to my friend. So notice that I am the subject, so I fulfill the first component of the noun. Give is my predicate, and the object, the direct object of my giving is the gift. But the indirect object of my giving the gift is the friend. Okay, so that's why the English uses to or for. Now, sometimes, what we can do is put the indirect object right after the verb. Okay, so for example, I give a gift to my friend turns into I give my friend a gift. Notice that friend now is after my predicate give, and gift is the last thing. Even though I switched the order of words, and now the to or for is no longer there, the direct object of my giving still remains the gift. The indirect object is the friend. The number 4 function of a noun is a possessive, also known as a genitive. And genitive comes into many different forms. It pretty much shows ownership and answers the question, whose is this? So whose pen is this? Whose dad is this? Whose mom is this? And we're always going to usually have the preposition of. So as soon as you see of right in front of that noun, it tells you this is a possessive. And we've seen it in our challenges a lot of times. Something called a partitive genitive, right? So a genitive that takes on a part of a greater whole. So one of the boys was one of the examples that we used in the challenges. One is my subject, and of the boys is the possessive. Possessives will also show ownership of different things, like John's book, and then we have a lot of apostrophes. So a punctuation to look out for is the apostrophe, which looks like this. Okay, so for example, John's book. Okay, notice the apostrophe comes after John, and then I add an S. John's book, which you can also say the book of John. Okay, but if my noun ends in an S, okay, in an S, like for example, if we are going to figure out a word that ends in an S, Nicholas. Okay, so I'm just going to divide that out here for you. Nicholas ends in an S. So if I'm going to say this is Nicholas's book, all I do is put an apostrophe at the end of that S, and I don't do anything else. Because this noun here, or this proper noun, ends in an S. Awesome? Great. Now number 5. So I got subject, direct object, indirect object, possessive. And then I have this, which is pretty much my favorite one. It's called the object of preposition. Okay. And I'll just put prep O. Okay, and this pretty much follows noun, which follows all prepositions. And we will be dealing with prepositions in part of the speech a little bit later on, but really, the clue to prepositions is to pretty much read one word, and then if you get this question, what? For example, I'll say the book on. The book on what? The book on the shelf. Shelf, it becomes the object of the preposition, and on is my preposition. So prepositions, examples of these are on, in, with, by, etc. Okay? So those objects of prepositions can be put pretty much anywhere you want within a sentence. So that's why they're my favorite. You can add them to as many different components as you'd like, and we'll get into that as examples in a few seconds. The last function of a noun in the English language is known as a predicate nominative. Okay, the predicate nominative is always describing, so it describes the subject, and it must be the noun. Okay, so I would say something like Michael, comma, the student of history, comma. Student, in this case, is a noun describing Michael. Therefore, student is going to be the predicate nominative. Now, the predicate nominative does not necessarily have to describe the subject. It can also describe other nouns. Okay? So if you have a direct object, like for example, I gave my friend a present, comma, the one I got in the store. The one, which is one, the noun, is going to be the predicate nominative describing the book. Again, any noun that's describing another noun that's not an adjective but a noun is going to be called a predicate nominative. So these are 6 functions of a noun in the English language. Okay, and to give you examples, I'm just going to write out a very simple sentence. So let's start with something like I am giving books. Okay, let's just start with that. I am giving books. Very simple sentence. So notice that the subject requires you to have a beginning. And there's my subject right there. The I. I is the subject, the rest is the predicate, and then books comes after. Next up, let's use the same sentence to describe the direct object. Okay, so I am giving books. In this case, I is the subject, just like we said at the very beginning. We got our predicate and giving, but the direct object of what I'm giving, so the accusative, what comes after the predicate, is books. And it's right there. Okay. The third example is an indirect object. So again, I am giving books to the students. Okay. So right off the bat, you need to see the preposition to, which is what we put right there. This makes it the indirect object. Okay. Subject, direct object, and indirect object, which is the students are indirectly benefiting from me directly giving the books. If that makes any sense. And remember, I've mentioned before that you can rewrite this another way, which is to place the students before the direct object. So in this case, I am giving students books. Okay, so notice that now the preposition to is gone, and we have students right there. which is the indirect object still, even though it comes after the predicate. The best way to understand this, like we've done in the previous workshops, and you may see these sentences on many occasions. Keep in mind the subject. Keep in mind the predicate. If you're stuck on whether I'm giving students away or whether I'm giving books away, think about the context of what you're reading. I am giving. What am I giving? Am I giving students to books or am I giving books to students? That will help you determine which is which. Okay. Next, the possessive. So I am giving books to my students. Or, if we are going to write this, I am giving my students books. Okay. So notice that in this case, what is answering the question whose? Okay, so in this case, whose students are you giving book to? My students. Okay, and notice how close the possessive is to the main noun, which is students. Okay, possessives are always going to be very, very close to the nouns they modify. Okay, you can also say, if you're saying, well, Mr. G, there's no of, there's no preposition of, you can actually do it. You could say, I am giving, and this will sound a little bit weird, books to students of mine. See that? Right there, I use the preposition of. Okay, so 3 different ways of rewriting the possessive preposition of, or you can just stick to this. Okay. Object of the preposition answers pretty much everything you want it to answer, pertaining to using pretty much any preposition you want. So I am giving books to my students during ELA. Okay. Or we can just say in ELA class. Okay. Either way is fine. And notice that the object of the preposition, my preposition, is in. Okay, I'm going to highlight this first because notice that if I'm reading this word by word, okay, I get it. Am giving, okay. Books, okay. To my students, okay. In. When you stop at in, you start to hear this question, in what? There's your preposition. In class. Okay, so this is the object of the preposition belonging to the preposition in. I can add to it as many, this is why I love this case, object of the preposition, because you can use it as many times as you want and you will not run into a run-on sentence whatsoever. So I'm giving books to my students in class, in ELA class, after the test. See that? Here's another preposition. Here's another object of the preposition. Okay. And the wonderful thing about the object of the preposition is when you're using it like this, one after the other, no commas are required. Okay, so you are pretty much building and adding, making your sentence more beautiful, nicer. And notice that all we started with right here is just a simple I'm giving books. And now all of a sudden we built up that idea, that sentence, into I'm giving books to my students in the ELA class after the test. Last but not least comes the predicate nominative. In other words, it is a noun that is going to describe something. So I am giving books to my students in ELA class after the test. So now the question is, which noun do I want to talk about? So I could, for example, say I, a grade 7 teacher. Am giving books to my students. Teacher is the predicate nominative describing I. Now remember that I could say that the predicate nominative can describe not only just the subject, and can be identifying other things. So I, a grade 7 teacher, am giving books to my students, both boys and girls. Okay. Notice that boys and girls are all nouns describing students. Predicate nominative right there. Okay? So remember, these 6 different, and I'm going to highlight them for you, 6 different functions of the noun. All of these functions are absolutely important to know, because by knowing how your noun is going to work, your sentence gets better and you get to build on it. Remember, the biggest thing about a writer's block is, well, how beautiful can I make a sentence? Or how do I start creating a sentence? When at the end of the day, all you gotta do is just go back to basics. In other words, what is the subject of the statement that I'm about to make? Write it down. If the subject of your sentence is hockey, write down hockey. And then ask yourself, what kind of verb do I want to put after it? You could say, hockey is great. Beautiful, there's a sentence. Or you could say, okay, hockey is the most important sport in Canada. Okay, there's a lot of different ways that you can build around your subject if you only figure out what the subject is. So whenever you're going to be writing, whether it's an essay, whether it's an argument, whether it's answering a question, always ask yourself what the subject, which is that first major component, what your subject of that answer or that statement is going to be, and then write down that one noun. Just write that one noun down, and then around it start building. Predicate. What kind of verb do I want to give it? What do I want to say about it? And then as you go, you build it up until you get something like this, right? So we started with a very small sentence here, and by the time we got to number 6, we got this. So last but not least, before I leave you guys, the last thing I wanted to do is just to put on some fun facts about nouns. The first fun fact is that nouns are both proper and improper. Now, by that I don't mean, they're dressed in suits or dresses and they're proper and they speak properly versus the improper, the vulgar nouns. What I simply mean by that is proper nouns are nouns that equal capitalized or words beginning capital. I'll put the capital with a big C. Okay? So any noun you see that starts with a capital is known as a proper noun. Why? It's known as a proper noun because it needs to be respected. You cannot change the capital letter at the beginning of that word. It's impossible. So, for example, a name like Julia will always start with a capital. If I remove the capital, it will sound weird, right? I mean, imagine your own name just being lowercase instead of uppercase, okay? So proper nouns always begin with a capital uppercase letter, okay? An improper noun equals everything else. Everything else that's not capitalized is improper, and there you go. And last but not least, there are something called pronouns. Okay, so notice that the word noun is in front of it, and the pro simply means something that stands for nouns. In Latin, pro means on behalf of or in front of. In other words, pronouns are words that replace nouns, and they can be both proper and improper. So, for example, instead of saying James all the time, like James hit the ball and then James ran all the bases, and then James won us the game. Notice that I use James 3 times in this story. All I gotta do is take James and replace it with a he, okay? If it's a she, like Jamie or Anna, then it will be a she, okay? And there's also an it, okay? Which is a neuter noun. And in English, because English is so word reliant, that's another third fact that I want to tell you. We cannot tell the gender of a given word unless it's obvious, okay? So for example, the word chip is not an obvious feminine gendered word, and in English we wouldn't really care about it until we had to replace it with a pronoun. So for example, I bought a ship, but she sank off the coast of Bahamas, okay? You understand she replaces ship, and this is where it comes in handy to know the gender of the ship. There's no way in the English language you can know this unless you go to the dictionary and check the word. And typically in a dictionary, you're going to find something like this. You will find an F, an M for a masculine, and an N for a neuter. Okay, so when you see an F, an M, and an N beside the word in the dictionary, boom, there you go. You just found the gender. Unfortunately for us English speakers, that's about all we can do. In every other language, like for example, especially Romance languages like Italian or Spanish or French, you are going to have very specific endings to tell you the gender. So in French, we got the le for masculine, the la for feminine. In Spanish, we have, for example, masculine words ending in O, like niño, which would be for a little boy, and niña for a little girl, and there's an A at the end of that. So other languages tell you the gender. In our case, we can't. Will you be okay not knowing that? Yes, in a way you would. However, you never know. Especially when you're writing, or if you want to be an editor, or if you want to be an academic, it would definitely come in handy to know your genders. So that's it, guys. That's it for the nouns. I will make this copy here that I've just made online available to you. I will save it as a file and upload it to Google Classroom. Meanwhile, thank you so much for watching. And next part of speech tomorrow is going to be the verb. Thank you so much, and have a great day. Bye-bye.